friends. This is Rick the Grease Man, and I'm coming at you from my little home studio in central Iowa. In case you haven't been in tune to the weather news, about 10 days, 11 days ago, we got hit by a pretty nasty, very wide storm on a close to a class 2 hurricane level. Did a lot of damage. It took 3 days, almost 4 days for us to get power back here where we live. We were very fortunate. We didn't have any large trees hit anything significant. We had some significant sized branches come down, and there's some trees in the wooded area next to our house that's laying down. The neighborhood fared fairly well, but there are other areas of the state and the city of Des Moines that did not do so hot, and we're still cleaning up. This made it a bit harder for me to do videos the last 2 weeks ago, which I planned to do. Than this previous weekend. I worked pretty much the entire weekend trying to catch up for some jobs and things like that. It's similar today. I've got an all-night job tonight at about 8 o'clock till about 7 in the morning, so I figured, hey, we'll get in there and do some stuff. I've been looking at Bob Lazar's story and things attributed to Bob Lazar and his claims and so on and so forth for the past 3 months now or 4 months now, and trying to look at it from a literal perspective, as if what he was saying was the God's truth. And we all would like it to be true. Some of us would not like it to be true. There's always the naysayers. It's hard to pin down, and there's a lot of discrepancies in his life story, and much of it can be contributed to outside interference of the government and other agencies or corporations or what have you, who did their level best to make the man look like a nut, discredit him, to do away with his history, or he himself was just very clever and created something that he stuck to pretty religiously for most of his life, and just enough truth in there to make you buy into the story. Now, that got me going. What other people, who else out there have claims similar to Bob Lazar? Now, one of the things I've run into as I try to Google, when you go to do a Google search, you kind of have to have some keywords. You got to have an idea what the answer is to the question you're seeking, i.e. having the right terms or verbiage to get that engine search to provide you with usable information. And since some crazy nut decided to have this bogus raid on Area 51 a year back or 2 years back, the damn Google search engine is just flooded with information pertaining to or attached to that topic. So it made it very difficult to get any decent information. Now, over the years, I have seen videos and movies and read lots of books where other people have come forward with some pretty fantastic claims about Area 51 specifically, or elements within Area 51 or other locations around the globe. It's not, that's the thing that we have to keep in mind when we talk about the government. Any government, but specifically a very wealthy, very large government that has very deep pockets and very convoluted bureaucracy, allows for them to have multiple facilities. And then because there's such a thing as redundancies, there's also such a thing as interdepartmental, interbureau, intergovernmental agency rivalries. They don't always want to share the breakthroughs because they want to take the credit or the benefits of with their compatriots in other branches. So it's not implausible that there are other facilities in and around the country and outside the country that engages in black ops, black tech research and development. Not necessarily just UFOs, but advanced technology development, and then you add that to the corporations. There's a handful of really, really powerful, really wealthy, very connected corporations that also have their own research facilities and research think tanks and things like this. As conspiracies goes, there's bucketfuls. And I love a good conspiracy. This is about anyone else, but I've always believed that I don't, like I said, I don't want to lead the mob, and I sure don't want to follow the mob. You know, the lemmings will always jump off the cliff, and if the lead lemming leads them off the cliff, I don't want to be in the lead. And I want to be far enough back to see what the lead's doing and make my decision to, you know, to stay a step to the side so the mob doesn't shove me over the cliff out of sheer momentum. That's always been my belief and philosophy for most of my life. So I'm neither a follower nor a leader bee, etc., etc. All done, right? You never know. Anyway, so when I look at the possibilities that there are loads and loads of stuff going on out here, and that the fact that the government can have multiple agencies and multiple facilities, and case in point, as long as I've been alive, there's been an up and down movement to make Puerto Rico a state. And by all definitions, Puerto Rico is a state. They have a seat in the House. They are American citizens. They have American passports, or can be treated as American passports. The fact is that you can't argue that, well, they're not close enough to continental United States, because Hawaii is further away, and Hawaii at one time was in Puerto Rico's situation. So there's absolutely no reason why, logically speaking, we can't allow and invite a 51st state. I'm just saying, we could easily do this. We could do this with Guam and a couple of other places too. But why don't we? What's the advantages to keep Puerto Rico, for example, in the situation, the limbo that it's in? Well, for starters, because it's not a state, it's not obligated to follow certain laws and environmental dogma and so on and so forth that's established in the United States. So major corporations and the government can have facilities and do projects in Puerto Rico that they would not necessarily legally be able to do inside the continental United States, or inside United States proper state boundary situation. In addition to that, they don't have a state government that has this, all that entails. It's not until this recent year that a lot of people realize just how much power each state has in the greater scheme of things. People, when they talk about America, tend to forget that we are the United States of America. Hence, the states have a lot of autonomy. They can do a lot of stuff and thumb their noses at the feds. The feds do not control everything verbatim, and our president keeps falling on his face trying to make claims and declarations and demands without having the foreknowledge, or even bothering to look up that knowledge, or asking one of the numerous aides that would surely know this stuff what within the purview of the federal government and what isn't. So that said, I mean, there's a pretty good reason why, or keeping Puerto Rico in the status that it is, because it provides the government and the military and major corporations a lot of American amenities and American security or control, without having all the bothersome laws that might prevent them from doing certain things within the state legally. And not that that necessarily would stop some parts of our government, because our government is going to justify whatever they want to do in some manner or another. So, like I said, I know I've seen a handful of different people other than Bob Lazar that have cropped up over the years who have made claims to have seen UFO technology or interacted with aliens in Area 51 or in the vicinity of Area 51. And of course, their current claims are either doubtful or creditless or creditless, or have some significant credit to it, but everybody's made their efforts to lessen the impact or put doubt. That is something we're really good about, and our social media just magnifies this 100-fold. This is same social media is allowing me to have this platform right here and now, and to say that what I think and what I want to, what's in my mind, and share my opinions with those of you who listen to my rambling BS. This is why I put photos up instead of my my ugly mug. So you don't need yet another talking head. This way you can be driving down the road and listen to the thing, the video, as if it was a podcast, although I am far from any level of that sort of technology. Anyhow, when we look at the Area 51 itself, it's a vast area of space in the desert with a lot of possible locations that, look at, Dugway's not too far away, and then you got a major air base not too far away, and then there's areas in between that's pretty much out of sight, out of mind. It's not difficult to set up a facility behind one of these hills or within one of these hills to conduct even deeper levels of research or development, or in some cases interrogation or what have you. We also know through the Declassification Act, it was in '96, with allowed a lot of government, former top secret classified information, although heavily they call it didacted? No, didacted. Well, they took a Sharpie and went over a whole bunch of stuff and purposely blotted it out before they let the information out. So in truth, we didn't get the true Freedom of Information Act. We got a abridged version of it because somebody in the government went ahead and censored the material they were releasing to the public anyhow. But we know that there's a lot of these kinds of programs and things. We now know that the CIA conducted, and other agencies of the federal government conducted paranormal and psychic research for decades, and probably still are, and they are being held in facilities and places that may be just across the street from where you live or work, and you would never know it, or they're in some super secret location such as the outskirts of Area 51. Now, the traditional top technology research and development that goes on at the Area 51 that's commonly attributed to, testing experimental aircraft and weapon systems and things like this is perfectly logical, and it's absolutely guaranteed that that's exactly what they do there. What this picture we're looking at now with all the airfields and hangars and so on and so forth, of course they do that. But this also makes a wonderful cover for other things that they can do here, that because of the strict controls that they have on the area, allows them to go even deeper, even darker, however you want to do it. Now, of course, the conspiracies attribute there being massive underground system. This is just the top layer of a massive facility below ground, or a number of them. There's rumors of tunnel systems that crisscross under the desert to connect, like Edward Air Force Base, with other places. In some cases, it's even as far as going across the country, big enough tunnel systems that you could run a B-52 down, on a travel trailer underground. And we don't have any proof of that, but the fact of the matter is that we know we have that technology, the capability of constructing such a complex labyrinth of things is well within our government's ability and our contractors' ability. You just look at the channel and the tunnels that the Japanese are building to connect their islands. It's just the possibilities are there. So, in my search for other people, the one that jumped out the quickest, and it wasn't quick because I had to do a little bit of shuffling to get through a bunch of the BS that's out there. Well, my stuff ain't popped up yet, but it's still being qualified as the BS section of this stuff, I would assume. But is this fella named Boyd B. Bushman? Are you familiar with this gentleman? He died in 2014 at 78, and prior to dying, I'll just say it's a deathbed confession, but just prior to his death, he confessed to witnessing UFO research at Area 51 and other places, that he was actually involved in some of this research, not just at the Area 51, but also in corporate labs at places he worked for. And unlike Bob Lazar, he kept his mouth shut until the last minute. So he heavily is established. He's a very difficult person to discredit. The government could not do to him what is purported to have done to Bob Lazar, because this Mr. Bushman has his credentials in stone, and they're sterling, and he has loads of patents and loads of paperwork to prove he is what he says he is. Whether or not he could prove to have seen UFOs or worked with aliens or worked on alien technology, well, that's always doubtful because he doesn't have it, as his deathbed. To my knowledge, he did not present with any, except for a handful of very odd-looking photos, which, would have been very hard to take back in the day, but it's not impossible. There's no physical proof other than these so-called photos. And of course, everybody will tell you, well, you can Photoshop everything, you can image everything. And that's true. That is absolutely true. I won't doubt that, or won't dispute that at all. My understanding from Boyd B. Bushman is a scientist, confirmed, not just a scientist, but a very high-level scientist. He worked for years at Area 51. He has 27 patents to his name. They're established. You can look them up. He's worked for Hughes Aircraft, General Dynamics, Texas Instruments, Lockheed Martin, and has the paperwork and the material to back that up. And those corporations that still exist, most of these are long gone, but I think, General Dynamics, Texas Instruments is still around maybe. But anyway, they acknowledge he worked for them. And he has proven documentation that says he helped to develop the Stinger missile, the F-16 fighter, and a lot of other top technologies for the U.S. military in his lifetime. One of his crazy claims is that he claims that 19 members of his research team died in the process of trying to reverse engineer ET technology over the decades. Does that sound familiar to you? Do you think maybe that Boyd B. Bushman, knowing he's about ready to go meet his maker, just decided to go ahead and just, let's pull everybody's legs and spin up this yarn? He could very surely have done so. We do not know what kind of humor this person is, although the handful of people that the article that I read suggests that knew him said this is not the sort of, he would not say things like this if he didn't mean something. And there's other people that want to try to attach the article as saying that they agree with what he's saying, but you can't prove it, at least not without a lot more research and development. But this is just one example of another yet Bob Lazar. This is what Bob Lazar could have been today if he had kept his mouth shut when he first supposedly went to work for S4. So Bob B. Bushman, 78 years old, scientist, well-documented education, huge pedigree in his work history and technology that he's been invested with, makes claims that a large number of members of his research team over the years have died from interacting with trying to re-engineer, de-engineer alien tech. And Bob Lazar said that when he went to work, it was his work partner had said that the scientist or person who Bob Lazar replaced died in one of these failed attempts at reverse engineering by cutting into an active antigrav core or whatever it was and causing a small undocumented nuclear explosion. Well, how many other people died in that research incident? Could this individual have been one of those people, associated with Boyd B. Bushman, the age's capability? He'd have been a senior scientist about the time that Bob Lazar was in the program, or supposedly entered the program. So who knows? And how often would just take a moment for a minute and think about that. Just how far would our government and elements within the government and the scientists that are would be signed to these sort of hypothetical programs, go to actually find a breakthrough? Now, the technology is so exotic, so magical. Like I said, in the previous video, when you look at the technology, it's so simplistic in its appearance that it defies all conventions of what we consider high advanced technology by our own standards. The things are so simplistic. They're so seamlessly designed that they're not loaded with diodes and elements and controls and pipes and vectors and wiring and optics and all this other stuff. And these things are either built into the device upon its creation, which is quite feasible when you look at just our own crude 3D technology capabilities now, what they would be like in 100 years or 1,000 years or 10,000 years or 100,000 years. The fact that you could divide almost an entire very sophisticated technology piece of equipment in one thing, in one item, where everything is melded and fused together, or used the replicator to replicate it, just like we see in Star Trek. The possibility is very real because 3D printing is real, and the possibility for much more fantastic growth from that field is yet to be imagined, let alone produced. But the fact of it is, it will. It's like today, computers today are a million times faster and 100 times smaller than the ones that we constructed 70 years ago. And where will they be in another 100 years? Where will they be in the next 50 years? A lot of you here listening to me will have that lifespan. You're going to live for another 50 years, and we'll see a lot of great, fantastic developments. And you're going to see a whole lot of things that will develop that will be sublime. You may not realize just how fantastic that technology changed or developed without somebody else pointing out the big picture. And I've said that before in other videos too. All I have to do is look at my own lifetime, and when in the 80s, when personal computers were just being introduced, and compared to the stuff I'm using right now, it's just fantastic. Compared to the prices back then, compared to what they are now, it's just, absurdly cheap compared to what they were in the 80s. And then you add that to the technology and the software programming, what we're capable of doing with our computers today compared to those things. One of the first programs I ever had to play with was it was the size of a phone book, and you basically copied line for line for line, and you saved it on a frickin' floppy disk the size of a frickin' was a 5-inch floppy. Before that, it was a tape deck. So I mean, now look what we do. This particular laptop I bought and replace my other one a couple months ago does not have a CD carriage. It's all designed to be used with thumb drives now, because the the CD drives and stuff are going to go the same way that everything else has gone in short order. So what's the next form of storage other than the cloud? I'm not really keen on that idea, but I'm just saying. So this Boyd Bushman has some pretty fantastic claims, and yet they're not as radically crazy as that, what's that feller's name? Would be Guru, and I don't know where I got it wrote down. Mr. Stephen Greer. Mr. Stephen Greer is just loads and loads of out there compared to Boyd Bushman or Bob Lazar. I mean, these two men are pretty well grounded, or at least appear to be well grounded. And Bushman even more so than Lazar, from what I've seen. And I plan to do a little bit more research and digging into his story, because I think it's worth, my time. And whether it's worth your time to listen to or do your own research on it, I can't say. So, what do you think? There are other people out there nowadays. And this Boyd Bushman is not the only person out there other than Bob Lazar making these claims. And this fellow's credentials are carry much more weight than Lazar. And we know that people have a tendency, especially people who have spent their entire lifetime keeping quiet, biting their tongue, upholding their oath for secrecy, have a tendency to share some pretty fantastic stuff when they know they're not long for the world, when there's no chance that the government can punish them. And in this day and age, it's much, well, I'd like to say, but this year's been a very strange year, and there's a lot of boundaries that are being pushed and stressed and challenged in some terrible ways that I would never have thought possible in this country. And it scares me that if they continue to push that this country was going to become something that it was never meant to be. But I'm not going to get off on a tangent in that section here. But the fact is, what happened to, may or may not have happened to Bob Lazar back in the 80s, late 80s, quite feasible for that era. Would not likely to be so much today. Today, they would just muddle with it. They'd still do things. But I don't hear a whole lot of people coming forward and contradicting Bushman or claiming Bushman's a liar or a fraud or 100 other epitaphs that were attributed to Lazar. Why not? Maybe they're there and I just haven't found them. If you're familiar with them, by all means, share them and put it down in the commentary and help us all get a little better grip on Mr. Bushman's claims that he had in his lifetime work in the military / scientific government fields, because I think that's all worth checking and listening to, in my opinion. As for the possibility of the actual location for area or for S4, like I said before, what is the acronym mean? South for, the south section of Area 51 or the South Mountain or what have you. There are other stuff. I mean, there's videos out there. This is one from Google Earth where implicating that here's an outcropping on the Area 51 range that have these, and they're difficult to see, but that's the whole point of camouflaging something. But there's evidence that there are artificial structures here, potentially doors, lined up along the edge of this ridge. And you can see a little bit of stuff to the left where it's suggesting that there might be some road work or outworks and stuff that are slightly there. There's a road that appears to be on the other side of the hill hawk there. Appears to be a road. So we know that by Bob Lazar's statements that when he arrived at S4, it was by bus. He came in from the airport, the Janus flight to Area 51, and from there he was put onto a bus that had no, windows were covered up so they couldn't see out and see what was going on. So that implies that there has to be a road. Now, I also know that it's quite possible to camouflage pretty much anything. If you ever get a chance, if you don't think this way, just look at some of the great camouflage works done by the British in the World War II. Between a combination using searchlights to blind pilots as they're flying over at night to prevent them from seeing things like locks and dams and things like this, to painting runways with bomb crater, give it the look like they've been bombed to bejesus. Just create a painting. Imagine the pilots happen to take a leap of faith once they're coming down on a runway that appears to have been blasted to the, back to the Stone Age, knowing that that's just an illusion. So the fact of the matter is, camouflaging is something we've been doing quite well for thousands of years. And with modern day technology and ingenuity, even more so. So we might be looking at the side of a hill and we might not. It's hard to say. I've seen some other renditions of this same spot that is claimed to be the area that Bob Lazar more or less indicates, because he acknowledges he himself can't be 100% sure of the location other than because he can't look out the bus and when he's going to and from the place, and that he hadn't worked there long enough to become very attuned to it. Like I said, excuse the yawn, but Boyd, Mr. Scientist here, Boyd Bushman, and his story. Was he a Bob Lazar fan to decide to try to concoct something that was quite similar to what Bob Lazar was saying, or is he completely oblivious to Bob Lazar and this was his view on things? Is he a crackpot? Who knows, right? He's not the first one to say that. We've had at least one astronaut, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, who's made some pretty fantastic claims now that he's quote retired, And of course, people, it's hard to take a national hero and turn him into a laughing stock. So is the guy telling the truth as he sees it? Or is there the truth much more complicated than it sounds? Just asking, just saying. So, this is Rick. Until next time. Hopefully, I'm kind of running out of stuff for Bob Lazar. So I think I get a chance. I want to do a little more research into this Bob Bushman and see what we got. I mean, if I come up with any more stuff with Bob Lazar, I will definitely do another video on it. But till next time, keep thinking, keep your mind open, question everything.